All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Carlo Bobilis, and I'll be your moderator. Today's session will be presented by Technical Marketing Engineer, Technical Leader Robert Harris. But before I hand over the mic, I do have a few housekeeping items to cover today's session. Today's session will be recorded and made available on demand. We'll make sure to provide those details at the end. Also, we'd love to hear from you during today's session. So if you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the WebEx question and answer panel, where our wonderful panelists are ready to respond. For those tuning into our live stream, we thank you very much for joining in. However, Q&A is limited to those via WebEx. We will have a post-event discussion thread over on the Cisco Learning Network community where you can post any follow-up questions, and I'll make sure to link those in the chat. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming our presenter. Robert, over to you.
Thank you so much, Carlo, and welcome everybody today to today's webinar, Mastering Secure Network Analytics, Crafting Custom Security Events. Now, the title of today's webinar starts with the word mastering, but for me, in order to ever master anything, you've really got to go through and understand all the basics. And I think a good way to illustrate that here is a quote from the very famous Michael Jordan, where he's talking about the bottom falling out of what you're doing the minute that you get away from fundamentals. You know, in his case, that would be in sports and business, but in our case, it might be schoolwork, our job, whatever we're doing. And today, that's going to be in custom security events in secure network analytics. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about here today. We're going to start off kind of looking at events that you're hopefully familiar with inside of secure network analytics. And then we're going to dive right into custom security events, kind of describe those, talk about what they do. We're going to dig into best practices, and then we're going to start actually building some basic custom security events. And then we're going to get a little bit more specific in talking about how to customize these to your environment. We're going to wrap up by sharing some resources that are relevant to today's webinar, and we're going to take questions at the very end. But again, you can use that WebEx question and answer panel to ask questions here during the webinar. And like Carlos said, we do have panelists waiting by to answer those questions as we go. So my name is Robert Harris. I've been at Cisco about 6.5 years. I'm a technical marketing engineer for Secure Network Analytics and also Cisco XDR. Focus a lot on threat research and detection engineering. Before coming to Cisco, I was a security researcher specializing in vulnerability threat intelligence. And outside of work, I help run a big pet rescue just north of Atlanta. Love to travel, big into photography, high power rocketry, and just kind of general outdoor activities. So let's start off by looking at some familiar events. So if you've ever used Secure Network Analytics, hopefully you're familiar with the default security events. In the top right-hand corner, I've got the today's alarm widget showing there with some names of the default security events. So these are the events that are baked into Secure Network Analytics that you get right out of the box. And maybe you've seen some things on there like suspect data hoarding, high SMB peers, worm propagation, suspect long flow, and so on. And these are the events that everyone gets. You can go through and tune those events and really kind of set them up to your environment. Then if you're using the data store architecture, which hopefully either you're currently using it or you're planning to switch over to that, we add additional detections there through converged analytics, and we call those alerts. And I've got a screenshot of a new one down at the bottom there titled DNS traffic to Tor proxy. So that's another way you can get your security events inside of Secure Network Analytics. And then you've also, hopefully you might be familiar with what are called relationship events. And those are looking at how the traffic interacts between individual host groups. And if you've seen those, hopefully maybe you've also heard of at least custom security events. So custom security events, or CSEs for short, is your way to be able to create your own detections. And this is one of my favorite functions inside of Secure Network Analytics, because you can go through and define all the criteria for when a detection is going to fire. You're able to build it yourself and tailor it to your own specific environment. So in other words, take the things that you're able to see from your telemetry sources and craft a detection around those that's going to show you things that you actually really care about inside of your environment. When you spin up a new instance of Secure Network Analytics, there are 5 default custom security events, and I'll show you those here in a minute. When you're building the custom security event, there are 37 available fields that you can pick from. So if you look at the screenshot I've got on there in kind of the bottom left-hand corner of that, you can see where it says subject host groups, peer host groups. We're going to run through those here in just a second. When you're using multiple fields, as we have in this particular example, we perform a logical AND between those fields. If you have different elements within an individual field, there's a logical OR between those. So if you've got, say, multiple host groups or multiple applications or protocols listed in one of the elements that makes up your custom security event, there's an OR between those. And I'll demonstrate that here a little bit later on. And operating in speed with custom security events. Once you build a custom security event and you turn it on, it takes a couple of minutes for it to be enabled. But then typically from the time that we receive the telemetry that would match the criteria of your custom security event and it firing, it's very quickly, typically about a minute or two between something happening, being exported to us, say by a switch, a router, firewall, and us actually alerting on that. So it's a very fast way to go through and detect things that are happening on your network. All right, I mentioned there were 37 available fields for building custom security events. So I've got those listed here in the left 2 columns. And as you look through these names, you'll notice that for most of these, we can look at it either from the subject side or the peer side of the conversation. So we can look at things. Typically, a custom security event will be looking at least 2 of the first 4. So subject host group, subject host, peer host groups, peer host. Typically, we're going to be using host groups when building a custom security event. We can also look at things like users and devices if you have ICE integration, ports and protocols, TrustSec IDs and names. Again, we would get those from ICE integration. We can look at specific application, file hashes if we're using network visibility module or NVM data. Also from the NVM data, we can get the process names. We also will often use things like bytes, that being a byte count, a byte ratio. The byte ratio would basically be able to tell us who's the heavy talker in a conversation. It could tell us if someone is uploading or downloaded something, for example. We can look at packet counts. We can look at the subject orientation, that being, is it the client or the server? We can look at a flow action. So was the flow allowed or denied? We can look at protocols and services, total bytes, total packets, which is basically the sum of the subject bytes and packets, or with the peer bytes and packets is how that's calculated. We can even do something like look at time of day. So do we have an activity that maybe we allow during business hours, but we would not allow at, say, 2 o'clock in the morning? We can go through and get very granular with that. We can look at the duration of a conversation. So is this activity that we would expect to complete in a matter of seconds or minutes? However, the conversation has been taking place for hours, right? That's kind of something anomalous. Maybe we'd be interested in seeing. With the flow sensor, we can capture the server response time and the round trip time, so we can help kind of alert whenever maybe we've got a poor application performance happening on the network. Maybe you've got a critical application you really want to keep an eye on. And then also with encrypted traffic analytics, or ETA, we can also look at the TLS or SSL version that's being used. So maybe we could go through and alert on applications that are using insecure versions of TLS or SSL. On the right-hand side is a screenshot that kind of shows all of these together. I'll show you how to take a look at that. There's kind of two ways you can go through and pick these fields when you're building a custom security event. And I'll show you how to use both of those, but that's a screenshot from that. And how do we access custom security events? Well, if we log in to our manager's web UI, from the menu on the left-hand side, we are going to click on Configure, and then under Detection, we're going to select Policy Management. And that will take us to Policy Management, which lands on the Custom Events tab by default, which is where we want to be. And then when we're ready to build a new custom security event, in the top right-hand corner, we're going to select Create New Policy, and then from that drop-down menu, we're going to select Custom Security Event. So let me show you that live and in person here, everything we just talked about here. So here I am logged into my, my instance here, and we land by default on the Security Insights dashboard. So hopefully most of you are used to seeing this particular screen. But to get to policy management for looking at and creating custom security events, we're going to come over here on the left. We're going to click on Configure, and then we're going to come up here and select Policy Management under Detection. That's going to take us to the policy management page. You'll notice that there are three tabs here. The first one is custom events, which is where we want to be for today. We could also look at the relationship events that I mentioned earlier under familiar events, and then our core events. Those are the default security events I also mentioned earlier. But since we're by default on this custom events tab, you can come down here and we have a table, and you can see the name of the custom security event. You can see the description in there, which you can set when you build it. We can look at the subject and peer here, and these are typically, again, going to be host groups. So this one here, for our subject, we're looking for inside hosts, and the peer, we're looking for a custom reputation list. We have the status here. We can see whether it's turned on or off. We can also click on the arrow to the left of the name, and it will give us a generated summary. And I'll show you that here in a minute when we actually go and build a custom security event. And then under the actions column, we have an ellipses here, which brings up a context menu where we can either edit, delete, or duplicate a custom security event. So for example, if I come up here and select edit, this takes me to the criteria for the custom security event, and I'd be able to come over here and edit this this custom security event, kind of tweak it, maybe change the description or turn it off, for example, and do what I need to do here. So let's back out of here, and let's go and take a look at best practices when creating a custom security event. So if you take away one thing from today, it should be this very first line here as a huge caution to you. You want to always, always, always make sure you run a flow search first before you create a custom security event. And then once you turn it on and save it, you want to watch for a few minutes and make sure you don't end up flooding your environment, flooding the SOC with thousands of alerts for traffic that maybe we built a bad custom security event. I have seen it a number of times. Someone goes to build a custom security event, they turn it on, they save it, they walk away, they go to lunch, and they come back and it's fired 500 times. It happens. It's easy to do, so make sure you always validate what you're doing before you create your custom security event, and then always watch it for a while before you go on to do something else. A really good recommendation here is to prepend the name of your custom security event with either CSE colon or .CSE colon. And the reason for the dot is that brings it to the top of the list alphabetically. If you've gone through and you have spec'd out and configured a custom security event for something that's critical to you and your environment, you want a way to distinguish it from the default security events that ship in the product. So by prepending the name here, that's your way to kind of distinguish it as something that you have built. And I'll show you that later on. Another thing that's great to do is as you're creating your custom security event, there is a generated description, kind of a plain English generated description that is created. I always like to copy that to the description field. So when you're working on the policy management page, someone doesn't have to go and edit your custom security event in order to tell what it's actually doing. If it's in the description field, they'll be able to see it on that table we were looking at just a second ago. Also, because this is something that you have created that's going to be specific to your environment, I always recommend using response management functionality to do things like send a message via email or over to a SIM like Splunk, because it's going to be critical to your particular environment. And just for general recommendations here is I'd say start simple, work on some very simple use cases here to learn how to build these, and then go on and focus on your most critical assets. So what are the things that keep you up at night, that you worry about, that are really, really important to you? Build custom security events around those critical assets after you have these basics finished up here. And down at the bottom, here's an example of a flow search that we're going to run before building a custom security event. And I'll show you that when we go and do some basic custom security events here in a couple of minutes. So let's switch back over and do a quick demo here and just kind of show you how these are created. So we're back on our policy management page here. And in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to click on Create New Policy. And then from the drop-down, I'm going to select Custom Security Event. So it's just a few fields in here. We've got our name. And again, here you can see we have that recommendation of prepending it with CSE. The description, we're going to fill this in based off of this section here. As we build out the find criteria down here, this will automatically generate in kind of plain, simple English describing the rule that you have created. Some of these custom security events can kind of get kind of long, so this is a good way to act as a validation check to make sure that what you're building is actually what you want it to do. So I always start down here under this alarm win section. So just to show you how this works, we click on the plus sign and it's going to bring up this drop-down menu. And typically you're going to start with doing something like subject host groups, and oftentimes that's your inside host. So those are your assets that you own and control, that are typically your private IPs, your DMZ space, things like that. So I'm going to check that to include it and then click on apply. And you can see when I added this element down here and selected inside hosts, now this statement says when any host with an inside host communicates with any peer host, an alarm is raised. And as we keep adding elements, this description will change for us. So let's do that. Let's say, all right, maybe we're fine with inside hosts and we want to add a peer host group. Maybe we select outside hosts here. And notice this criteria has changed. Now it says when any host with an inside host communicates with any host with an outside host, an alarm is raised. And that's not really a great rule here, right? So that's an inside host basically talking to the internet. This is going to throw up alarms all day long. Well, maybe we have an administrative policy in our organization that says you're not allowed to use Telnet. It's still commonly in use, even though it's been known to be insecure for decades. But we can select that. We can select, say, maybe you're not allowed to SSH or Telnet from inside hosts to outside hosts. So let's do this. So we're going to click on Add Rule. And maybe I don't want to use this drop-down menu to go through the 37 different elements that are available. Maybe I want to see all of them. And I showed this to you on a slide earlier. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, this makes it very easy. I'm going to click on View All, and that brings up all of the different elements that are available here. So we're looking to look at Telnet or SSH traffic. So I'm going to click on Applications here. And in this case, we can either include or exclude applications. In this case, since we're looking for someone to be using Telnet or SSH, I'm going to click on Include, and it's going to bring up our application picker here. And I'm going to search for Telnet and then select those. And I also want to search for SSH and select those. And I'm going to click on Apply. And now look at our rule here. When any host with an inside host using any of the disallowed applications, these ones we just selected here, if it communicates with any host with an outside host, an alarm is raised. Now, I mentioned the logical and or earlier. So here we're anding these different elements together. So it must be this subject host group, and it must be this peer host group, and it must be one of these applications. But within this subject application field, there's an or in between these different elements here. So it must be SSH or SSH/SCP unclassified or Telnet unclassified. So any one of these four and an inside host and an outside host would fire that alarm. We can also do things like, you can also filter in here, right? So we can also do things like byte counts. So maybe we're okay if an inside host makes a telnet connection to an outside host, but maybe it needs to stay a small conversation. So maybe we could do something like, we could say 100K, 100,000, greater than 100,000. So if the conversation starts to exceed 100,000 bytes, we would raise that alarm. Or we could even do something like, maybe we're okay with this happening, but we're not okay with it happening between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. We could add the rule. We could come down here, we could click search for time, select time of day. Then we're going to define our time range up here. And what do we say, like 2 o'clock in the morning to, let's just say 5:59 a.m. We're going to apply that, click apply. And now you can see these rules can get very granular and very complex here as we go through. And again, this plain English description will be updated as we add more elements. So then what I like to do when we're through with the criteria here, copy that, paste it in the description, and then we build a name here, and then we're just going to call this the ridiculous event, right? This doesn't actually mean anything. And then we could come over here, we could toggle the status to on, and we could save it. And then within a couple of minutes, anytime there's a criteria matching what we have set up in here, it would be firing here. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle this on. I'm going to click on save. And now you'll notice instead of 5 custom security events, we now have 6. So if I scroll to the bottom, here's our ridiculous event here. Because this one, I really don't want this to ever fire. I'm just going to toggle it off here, just for demonstration purposes. So that's how you go through and kind of build all these. The other thing to point out here is if I go back and edit this ridiculous event, there are some hoverovers in here. So some of these different elements will give you some help as you're going through, telling you kind of the criteria about that particular event. Also, if you want to remember how these different fields work together, under find, if you hover over that, it explains that logical and or conditions in there, and kind of how the custom security event works in general. All right. So let's get out of here and we'll go back to our slides and let's look at some basic custom security events. So these are really easy kind of use cases to create here to start with learning how to build these. So we can do things like looking for traffic to an individual country. In the screenshot at the bottom, I'm looking for any inside host talking to North Korea. Right? So maybe we can identify a list of countries that we don't do business with that we want to be alerted to any time someone is talking to that particular country. You can do that by creating one individual country per individual custom security event, or remember how our elements work together within a field. We could add multiple countries to the peer host group, and those would provide a logical or between those, right? So we could come up with a list of, say, a dozen countries we don't do business with that we consider to be suspicious. We could enter all of those in the peer host group, and then anytime an inside host would be talking to any of those peer host groups, we would go through and fire off the custom security event. We can do things like look for rogue DNS servers. So hopefully we've got some established DNS servers in our environment. And if someone starts spinning up their own DNS server and start using that, it's a pretty easy use case to figure out how to detect that. And then I also recommend just kind of looking for other policy use cases. So if you've got some administrative policies against using certain applications and protocols in your environment, that's a pretty easy one to go through and set up as, again, as a training, a learning experience here to figure out exactly how these custom security events work. So let's go back into our demo instance here and let's build our first real custom security event. Again, we're on the policy management page. We're on the custom events tab. We're going to go to create new policy and select custom security event. So let's do this one based on an individual country. So we're going to start building our criteria. I'm going to click on the plus sign. I want to select my subject host group. I want to make that inside host, so all the assets that I own and control. I'm going to add the peer host group here, and this is a cool trick you can do. So if we come up here to the search bar, I'm going to type in Korea, and I'm going to search for Korea. Well, we've got Republic of Korea, that being South Korea, and then we also have Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is North Korea. So in these country listings, we use the proper name of the country, so make sure you're searching for the proper name, right? We could come up here and we could select North Korea. We could apply that, and you can see we've built out this description. When any host within inside host communicates within any host within Democratic People's Republic of Korea, an alarm is raised. And again, what I usually like to do here is copy that description and paste it up here. And then let's create a name for this. So we're going to call it CSE traffic to North Korea. We're going to toggle that on and we're going to click on save. And here it tells you it may take up to 5 minutes for it to become active. My experience is it's usually closer to a minute or two. And then when we would start seeing that traffic, we would fire off that custom security event. So here you can see it is down here. Now, again, one of the best practices before you build any of these, I just did this one as kind of a quick demo here, is you always want to do a flow search before you build something. And let me show you a really good example of why you want to do this. So I'm going to come up here to investigate and then go to flow search. And what we're going to effectively do here is build out our custom security event using a flow search before we actually go and build it. Now, I already know the answer to what I'm going to show you here, so that's why I built one to begin with, just as a demonstration. But really where you want to start is here in the flow search, right? So let's build the one we just did looking for North Korea. So here for my subject host groups, I'm going to click on select. We're going to select inside hosts. I'm going to apply that. And then under peer, for peer host groups, I'm going to click on select. We're going to do that same search for Korea. And we're going to select North Korea, apply that. And under our time range, it defaults to last 5 minutes. I'm going to change that to the last 24 hours, and I'm going to click on search. The reason we did the last 24 hours is we want to get an accurate idea of about how many times our custom security event would have fired if we would have had existing traffic in our environment. And here you can see the banner tells us our search criteria returned no results, right? So doing something to looking for traffic to North Korea would definitely be a good use case for us here. Now let's look at another one here that could have gotten us into trouble if we would have just built a custom security event without doing a flow search first. So I'm going to come up here and click on Edit Search, and we're going to get rid of North Korea here. And instead, for our peer host group, we're going to select, and this time we're going to look for Russia. And again, remember, we're using the full proper names of these countries. So Russian Federation is what we're going to select, and we're going to click on Apply. We're already set for the last 24 hours for our time range. I'm going to click on Search and watch what happens here. Watch this top bar for our flow search results. Now this is limited to 2,000 records, and it's going to hit 2,000 here pretty quickly. So there we are at 1591. And there we go, almost 2,700 different pieces of traffic from our inside host to Russia. We limit it to 2,000 results, so there's probably more than this. But point being is if we had created a custom security event where Russia, or Russian Federation, was our peer host group, it would have flooded our Secure Network Analytics instance with that custom security event, and probably would have flooded the SOC too if we're sending over syslog messages to a SIM, for example. So one thing we could do is we can say, okay, well, these are mostly like smaller conversations. Maybe we're not so concerned about those, but we could come back up here and go to Edit Search, and we can refine this a little bit. We can come down here under Connection Options and look at, say, total bytes. Maybe we'll want to say, all right, well, maybe we're okay if it's a small conversation because it's probably an ad or something being hosted somewhere. But if the total conversation byte count goes over 5 million, 5 megabytes, maybe then we're interested. So I can define some additional, more granular criteria here, go up to the top, and I'm going to search again. And you will see that our results are going to be drastically different this time simply by adding in one more criteria here. We went from almost 2,700 plus with our main search, and now that I added greater than 5 million bytes, you can see we've got 5 search results. And maybe we're okay with sending 5 traffic to Russia custom security event alarms to our SOC every day. So you got to get a little bit creative when you're doing these and figuring out how to kind of drill down into those. So maybe we could come back here, go back to our policy management page, and let's say we've done a number of searches and we've come up with our list of countries, right? We could come down here to our traffic to North Korea alert. We could click on the ellipses. We could edit it, and then we could do things like add in other countries in here. So, right, so maybe like Iran was one of those. We can select Iran here and apply that. And, you know, we could just keep adding these. And then, of course, we would want to change the name here, suspicious countries. And then, of course, update our description here, right? So repaste the new description here. In my case, I'm going to turn this off because I think there might be some traffic to Iran here. And I'm going to click on Save. But you can see you can go through and really tailor these to however you want. And then when we go back and look at our policy management table, we can see all of those countries are listed down in here as well. All right, let's look at doing like a rogue DNS server example here. I'm going to go back up here to create new policy. I'm going to select custom security event. Let's start building our criteria. And earlier we said we're looking for an inside host. Click on apply there, talking to another inside host that's not one of our DNS servers. We haven't really talked about how to do is one but is not another. Well, luckily it's very easy to do. Let's add in our peer host group here, and let's expand out our inside hosts. I'm going to check inside host because that was one of our criteria. And then I'm going to come and find our DNS servers that are our proper DNS servers that everybody should be using. I'm going to expand out by function, internet services, and there's our DNS servers. Well, if I come over here and I click on this again, you can see it is now an X. It's a very light X inside of there, and that means to exclude. And you can see there's instructions up here on how to include and exclude and clear out certain host groups. So now when I click on apply, watch what happens. So subject host group is inside host, peer host group is inside host, except DNS servers, right? And if we read our description, when any host with an inside host communicates with any host with an inside host except DNS servers, an alarm is raised, all right? Well, now all we need to do is come down here and we need to add our application. I'm going to go to the view all to do this. And there it is. Let's say subject application. We want to include DNS. And we come up here and we're going to search for DNS. And we've got both DNS and multicast DNS. Let's select all of those and click on apply, right? So now an inside host talking to another inside host that's not a DNS server, and we're using DNS or multicast DNS, we would go through and erase this alarm. So that's how we find a rogue DNS server. We're going to copy our description that's generated up to the description field, and we're going to call this CSE rogue DNS server. Now this one, I know this activity is taking place inside of my demo lab environment. I'm not going to turn it on, otherwise it would flood my lab here. But in your case, if you had already done the search and determined that this was good criteria by using a flow search, you'd want to turn it on, and then you'd come up here and save. And then in a couple of minutes with just we added 3 lines in there, you'd be able to find rogue DNS servers automatically in your environment. So hopefully you can see these are pretty easy to go through and create. Use these basic use cases down here as a learning experience. One other thing to note down here, we were copying and pasting these descriptions into the description field. If you also click on this triangle, it will show you the same text down here as well. I like to copy it in here just because it's a lot easier to look at a table. Imagine if you had 25 custom security events built, you wouldn't want to have to go through and click on this triangle next to every one of them to go through and get this automatically generated summary displayed to you here. So that's how you do the basic custom security events. We just did the demo on that. Let's talk about getting a little bit more specific and how to customize these to your environment. So you've learned how to do the basics here. You've learned how to create the custom security event. You've gone through, you've done your flow searches here. What is next for us? Well, remember my earlier recommendation was to move into your critical assets there. We can do a lot of different things inside of Secure Network Analytics. We can build all kinds of custom security events. We can do tuning, relationship events. We've got our converged analytics alerts running. Where do I start next is kind of a common question with new users to the product. And this is where I suggest that you go, is make sure you're classifying those critical assets in your host groups. So the way you do that is I'm going to go back over here and we're going to go back to configure. We're going to select host group management. Typically, we're going to be working within our inside host when we're doing that. Usually we classify things first by function. We've got kind of a default set of, in this tree structure here, of host groups in here, and just find where your things live. So here's expand out your servers, right? You can either add in your own applications. You can make one as a child of application servers by clicking on the ellipses and then adding a host group. And then, you could give it your critical application server host name in there and kind of go through this hierarchy and make sure you've got those things that are very, very important to you defined in your host group management here. The next thing you want to do is, now that we've got those host groups set up, you want to let those kind of bake for a little bit. You want to get that traffic generated and get it tagged based on those host groups that you just set up. So I'd recommend letting that run for about a day after you do your classification, and then start modeling that traffic with the flow search. And this is a little bit different than what I described earlier, where you kind of already had this idea in your mind about what you wanted to make. But go through and just do a simple flow search where you've selected that critical application and just see what's talking to it. And this point usually is a surprise to a lot of people. They know this application inside and out. Oh yeah, the front end talks to the back end using this port and protocol, and the conversations look a certain way, and here's how clients connect to it, and they're using HTTPS, and it uses this DNS server, and it does a nightly backup and all this stuff, right? They know how the application works until we actually look at what happened on the wire. And I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting with somebody and I said, okay, what's the most important thing to you on this network? Okay, let's go do a flow search around it. And they are blown away by the conversations that are happening with that critical asset that they had no idea were happening. So hopefully we're capturing traffic, say it like an access layer switch right in front of this application that we care the most about. And we can go through and see absolutely everything that it's doing on the network. Once we've gone through and modeled everything using that flow search, then we should have a good idea about the criteria of what is allowed, what is not allowed, and we can build a custom security event for that. So I have an example down here at the bottom, and I intentionally put an error in this one down here. So here we're looking for subject host groups talking to um, really anybody. If you read the generated description here, communicates with any host except application servers, NTP servers, and backup servers. Well, we know the database server, it's a back-end database. It should be allowed to talk to the front-end application server. All right, we should allow it to talk to our NTP servers to set its time and whatnot. And we know we do a nightly backup, and we should allow it to talk to our backup servers. Well, what am I missing here? And if you said DNS, you are correct, right? Any box on the network at some point in time is going to talk to DNS. So again, this is why we want to go through and model this and make sure we're capturing everything that those servers are talking to. And when you go through and do that flow search, I'd bet you $1 that you're going to find a surprise in there somewhere as to what your application is actually doing. It might be using some library that's sending statistics back somewhere that you had no idea that it was actually doing. So let's go through and kind of do a demo on how you would do that in the product here. Right, so we're going to come over here, go back to configure. We're going to go to policy management. We're going to create our new policy, and we're going to create a custom security event, right? So we have gone through, we've already classified our critical application. I showed you that in the host group management a minute ago. And we're going to create our subject host group, and we're going to focus on the application servers, right? So I'm going to search for application. There it is, exactly where we classified it, under inside hosts by function, servers, application servers. And hopefully you've created another child down here for the name of your widget application or whatever it is. And we would select that. We would apply that. And all right, we know based on our flow search, it's allowed to talk to 4 other servers and that it doesn't talk to anybody else. We've done a really good job putting our controls in place, but who knows, maybe down the line somewhere, somebody messes up an ACL somewhere, somebody provides a different route to the application servers by mistake. Things look pretty good today. We really shouldn't get any hits on this, but in the future, if that ever changes, because this is our most critical asset, we want to be alerted to that. So that's the line of thinking you should have as you're going through creating these custom security events. So let's pick our peer host groups. And this one, since I'm selecting multiple, I'm just going to expand this out inside hosts by function. Remember we talked about, oh yeah, we forgot to put our DNS servers in there. So let's expand out our internet services. And in this case, remember, we want to exclude these. So I'm going to click once, twice, follow the instructions up here, 2 clicks. Now we're excluding DNS servers because it's allowed to talk to those. And then we're going to come down here and go to servers. All right, we want to exclude our application servers. So 1 click, 2 clicks. Our backup, that's allowed, 1 click, 2 click, and then NTP, 1 click, 2 clicks. And then I'm going to come down here and click on apply. So now we have when any host within the application servers communicates with any peer host group, except for these down here, we're going to go through and kind of raise that alarm. And the other peer that we actually want to add down here is we want to add in the inside hosts. And then we would go and exclude those. I apologize. There we go. So we got our 4 in there. And now we have it set up right here. And we could copy that and then save it as the name. And again, don't forget about all these other criteria in here that you can select from. When I come down here and go to view all, you can get really creative and match based upon the contents of your flow search and say, I want, again, look at users. I want to look at the time of day. I want to look at total bytes, right? Maybe I'm okay if somebody talks to my application servers using HTTPS, but it should be less than a 10-minute, a 10 megabyte conversation for the subject and peer side of that, right? We can get very, very granular in here and get it down to the point that you've got yourself a very high fidelity kind of alarm built in here. The last thing I want to look at is showing you how to investigate once you've built up all these custom security events and they fired, how to go through and investigate those, right? So we're going to leave this one here and we're going to go to Monitor and Security Insights Dashboard. We're going to leave this page. And the way I like to go and find my custom security events is using this alarms by type widget here. And what I like to do is click on deselect all, which clears the graph, and then come in here and find my custom security events. Well, here's one, peer-to-peer to internet, and here's one, possible remote access breach. So remember the best practice where I said to prepend it with either CSE colon or .CSE colon? Here is where it makes the difference for you to be able to distinguish it from your default security events. So now I see, okay, well, I had 2 yesterday, I had 2 here today. Let's drill into the 2 from yesterday. I'm going to click on that bar in the chart. Here it's going to show me those alarms. Sure enough, here's my custom security event name. I can do things like come in here and view the details of that. So this will show me kind of what we saw happening within that custom security event. If I expand it, I also get the description of it down here, so I know what criteria it was meeting for this custom security event to have fired. And then we can do things like go to actions and pivot into associated flows. And what this is going to do is it's going to do a flow search for us, looking for the activity between our subject and peer host group. Now, that particular custom security event was looking for RDP traffic between the subject and peer here, and I think that's what it was. I'd have to go back and look at it, but we're looking for this traffic, and sure enough, here's all the different flows in between that that subject and peer here for you to go through and do your investigation. And then you can expand out these flow records here and get the full details of everything that was actually happening. So that's how you go through and investigate once a custom security event has actually fired for you. I'd like to wrap up here today by giving you some additional resources to take a look at. I picked out a couple pieces of content from the Secure Analytics Training Center that maps very closely to what we talked about. Again, going back to basics here, you want to understand your host group structure. So there's some training there, and then a link on policy management for looking at custom events. This is all free training. All you need is a CCO ID to log in to the Secure Analytics Training Center. These slides will be available after the presentation with these links. Typically, in about a week, we post the video and the slides here, so you'll have access to that. But if you just want to visit the learnsecureanalytics.cisco.com, log in with your CCO ID, you can start browsing through the Secure Network Analytics side that you see in the bottom left on that screenshot, and go find the host and host group and the policy management custom events training that's in there. Here's some more detailed resources that are available to you here. Custom security events, we've got 3 pieces of training in here. Again, there's the host and host group management. And then also we talked about the response management as well, so you can be alerted right away whenever one of those custom security events fires. We've got training on response management as well. For more general training, you can go through and look at the established learning paths that are in the links there. Plus, we have our virtual instructor-led training, which are our free courses with an instructor that you can take just by having a CCO ID and logging into the training center. We've got those down there. And then we've got some more general links on the right-hand side about our available resources. So with that all being done, what questions do you all have for me about custom security events?
Great job, Robert. As we wait for questions to come in, I do want to include the post-event discussion thread in the chat. And actually, what I'll do is I'll see if I can place a copy of the slide deck as a downloadable PDF in that post-event discussion thread as well, so you can get access to those links much sooner.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Let's see. There was a question earlier, and then Peter actually answered it. Maybe we can talk about it a bit more. It's how do we detect encrypted traffic to a particular geography? And Peter mentioned you could couple the country geography options you see, Robert, you were doing earlier, defining earlier, with the available encryption related parameters as additional criteria. And then you would need ETA capable equipment within your network, e.g. a Catalyst 9300 switch, SNA flow sensors, telemetry broker, etc., generating telemetry that will be, or that, and that being sent to into SNA.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say, right? So maybe you're looking for particular types of traffic heading to Europe here. I've selected inside host Europe as the peer host group. And don't forget to go back and look at this view all here, right? One of the options we have under our connection is encryption TLS SSL version, right? So maybe we're looking for something like, here's some examples that it gives you, right? SSL 1.0 or TLS under 1.2. So we could do something like that. Less than TLS 1.2 would be considered insecure. So there, anytime one of our assets talks to Europe, or we could get down more specific to individual countries using an insecure encryption version, we would raise an alarm there, right? Or don't forget, you can also come in here and do things like look for particular port and protocol selections. We can look for individual applications and services, other protocols available here to us. So whatever is going to be kind of your tell for what should not be allowed on your network, or that you think is a tell for some type of malicious activity, you can go through and craft that. You can get very creative with this. Again, you can stack a bunch of these together here to really dial in exactly what it is that you're looking for. So, yep, Peter nailed that one as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So we can go ahead and start to wrap up. Robert, would you like to have any closing remarks?
Yes, sir. So thank you all so much for attending today's webinar here. I hope you learned something about how to craft custom security events. I hope you can take what I taught you here today back to your job and be able to dial in, look for anomalous activity or malicious activity to your critical assets, and hope you get a better security posture out of what you've learned here in the last 50 some odd minutes. Thank you so much for attending today, and hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Robert. And thank you to Peter, our panelists, and the whole team for bringing your knowledge to the Cisco community. Again, if you have a question, I'll keep the Q&A window open for a couple more minutes, or feel free to go ahead and browse to that post-event discussion thread, where you can continue the conversation and find additional resources. Okay, at this time, you'll be directed to a survey, so we do encourage you to take the time to participate. Your feedback is important, and we would really love to hear what you have to say, along with what other topics you'd like to see discussed in future sessions. Again, we thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.